Hey everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with our weekly update on social media. Thank you as always for joining us. A lot going on. The financial crisis caused by big government and big spending. I'll talk about that. New startling information or further confirmation of the racketeering operation run by the Biden family with the Communist Chinese. Big court victory against another foreign government, Qatar, by Judicial Watch in the state of Texas, plus a major new lawsuit over the Biden administration abuse of Elon Musk for his daring effort to bring back more free speech to Twitter. First up is the banking crisis, that it's, deja vu all over again for those of you who remember how 2008 went. And it goes without saying, or at least it should go without saying, that Judicial Watch, of course, will be front and center in investigating the Biden administration's mishandling, lawlessness, really just contempt for the American taxpayer in the handling of this banking crisis. And Judicial Watch in 2008, I guess it's probably not surprising, but it's outrageous that despite all that money spent to back up the banks and, quote, rescue the financial system, it was Judicial Watch who was doing, again, most of the heavy lifting in investigating what was behind this. How were these decisions being made? What was the legal basis for these decisions? And we found they were making it up as they went along. So, for instance, we had asked for records about the Federal Reserve and how it was operating. It was pretty clear that their decision-making was ad hoc, meaning it was a, quote, case-by-case basis, and they really had no principled way of doling out billions in taxpayer subsidies and backups for the financial sector. And when it came to the so-called bank rescues or bank bailouts in 2008 and 9, we found that there were really more in the line of takeovers. This is really an incredible story. I remember reading in the Wall Street Journal that the bankers said, well, we went in and we weren't given much choice as to whether to take the money or not. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Let's learn about that meeting. So we had to sue and sue to get access to these records. And the documents finally came out, and we found the talking points for the meeting by then, who was the Treasury Secretary at the time, or top official at the time? Tim Geithner. He wasn't Treasury Secretary. He was about to become Treasury Secretary shortly thereafter under Obama. But essentially, the big banks were called in to Treasury, and they were told that you need to take this infusion of federal money, and if you don't like it, we're going to tell you you have to take it. And we have the documents, and I think we can post them below. They literally signed little permission slips. I've signed more sophisticated documents for my kids to go on class trips than the documents authorizing billions of dollars in taxpayer cash that these bankers were forced to sign. So that's my way of saying whenever you hear bailout, think takeover. And I know some are confused. Why is the left all excited about bailing out these banks and providing taxpayer-backed cash and support for these banks? And the way to think about it isn't as a bailout, because it isn't a bailout, it's a takeover. So when the government comes in and, quote, helps, they're really setting themselves up to be running the banks in the financial sector. And in the case of Silicon Valley Bank, it was a bank that should never have gotten the benefits that the Biden administration gave to them, and I'll get into that in a second. But you can tell why the Biden administration was interested in taking it over, because it was a sensitive bank in the sense that it was one of the top banks in the nation. It wasn't the top bank in the nation in terms of size, but a very important bank in terms of providing venture capital for startups. So of course the Biden administration is going to want some of that. And so they came in, and you probably have followed the news close enough to know that typically your deposits at banks are insured by the FDIC up to a limit of $250,000. Well, it turns out that wasn't sufficient for the Silicon Valley Bank. And so the Biden administration just threw those rules out the window and said, oh, we're going to insure all deposits, including the deposits of corporations who know better, who are over the $250,000 limit. And on top of that, we're going to provide backups for all banks in America so they can mitigate their exposure to the bonds that they, practically speaking, have been required to take on by the last bailout and reform. The bonds which are not throwing off enough interest for too many banks in light of their current stresses they're facing. And so they're just going to be converted with your taxpayer support and backing and get all rescued. And if they take the backing, if they take the special loans, they are going to get, you can be sure, additional regulatory restrictions on their activities. And because it's the left, it's going to be more of the ESG, DEI, critical race theory type of regulations that have distracted our financial sector so much as it is. All right. Well, so I was told by someone that that for instance, Silicon Valley Bank, they had all these risk committees, including risk committees on climate action and all these leftist bogeymen out there that are used to justify extracting money from the financial sector and advancing, frankly, the communist agenda. And but I don't think there was probably a risk committee for leaving $450 million in the equivalent of a checking account. Any company who does that, the idea that we would be bailing them out and providing them these special benefits is just outrageous. And who pays for it? They say, "Don't worry, the taxpayer doesn't pay for it." That's a load of garbage, because they're saying we'll get it from fees to other banks. Well, guess who pays the fees? You do. You're the customers. And of course, we know from past experience, sometimes those fees don't match the outlays. So who has to back it up? Taxpayers. So you're bailing out Silicon Valley Bank. And of course, Silicon Valley Bank also is notoriously close to the Chinese Communist Party. Lots of Chinese communist companies have accounts there. They're business partners of the Chinese. So guess what, dear taxpayer? You're bailing out the Chinese Communist government. And it's one thing to bail it out, and sometimes you got to bail out a bank that has businesses in places that you object to. But in this case, there was no systemic risk caused by the Silicon Valley Bank going under. It was a risk that was generated, or a contagion that was generated as a result of these leftist politicians saying the sky was going to fall if their favorite bank in California wasn't taken care of. And the Washington Post had a story the other day, trying to describe how the Bush-Biden administration carefully orchestrated this bailout. And it became clear from the story that the bailout was about a political pressure campaign from Democrat congressmen out of California. So that was the sophisticated political analysis or fiscal analysis that they were bringing to bear on this bank. There was no systemic issue that required this bank to be bailed out, but there was a political need to do it. And so all the rules were thrown out, and just like that, by essentially guaranteeing every deposit in the United States, in every bank, we have a $19 trillion potential liability. $19 trillion. And you can bet that number is not going to be part of the budget discussion this year. $19 trillion. And of course, this game played by the Biden administration has not reassured anyone, nor should it have, because it shows that decisions are political. It shows that the decisions were not based on a fair application of the law and regulations, but as I described earlier, ad hoc decision making. And it shows the emperor has no clothes. So when the government just spends and spends and spends, and it turns out that in order to deal with that excessive spending and the monetary flood of cash, we have to raise interest rates. All those so-called safe bonds these banks were required to take up to show that, quote, they were safe, become a lot less valuable and really quite risky, as the Silicon Valley Bank shutdown showed. And to highlight the political nature of this, I'm going to quote Barney Frank. Now, Barney Frank is the notoriously corrupt former congressman who was instrumental in essentially protecting a lot of the bad government decision-making and encouraging it that led to the 2008 various crises. Notoriously left-wing congressman from Massachusetts. He's no longer there. But he's on the board of the Signature Bank, which was the second other big bank that collapsed after Silicon Valley. And of course, you know, many of us, including me, were noting the irony of this left-wing critic of the banking cashing in after he left office by being on the board of a big bank. But he made the point that he said, well, our bank was fine, and we should have been allowed to open. But his analysis was because we were invested in this cryptocurrency sector. Politically, they didn't like it, and so they saw it as an opportunity, the Biden administration, to shut it down. So you've got this antagonism towards cryptocurrency, and I'm not going to get into the pluses and minuses of the crypto world, but it just highlights these are political decisions that are being made with your money. And our whole economy gets buffeted as a result of this government malregulation and politicized decision making. And I tweeted out the other day, only the government can break an economy. And that's what the Biden administration's attempting to do, in my view. They see an opportunity for further regulation and takeover of our financial sector, and the damage that it does to shareholders, depositors, interest rates, you name it, they don't care. You know, you would think that the left hates inflation, and they don't hate inflation. I mean, to the degree it becomes politically inconvenient, they don't like it. But they don't mind inflation because it makes government spending easier to finance. They don't dislike this, they treat inflation the same way as they treat higher taxes. They want to get the taxes and inflation as high as politically feasible in order to fund their spending schemes. So, that's kind of my, I would say, 3/4 baked analysis of what's going on. Everything you're being told is a lie, in the sense that the Biden administration doesn't know what it's doing. The officials in charge of managing the banking sector are making political decisions, not ones informed, in my view, by a careful reading of the law and respect for taxpayers and those who have investments and deposits in banks across the country. And now our whole economy is put at risk because of this corrupt socialism that's being imposed by the Biden administration, taking advantage of one bank going south to create a crisis that has dramatically increased government control of the private sector. That's how you lose a republic. Crises that those who oppose a Republican form of government use to undermine the Republican form of government. And by that, I mean a constitutional system that's supposed to restrain government, as opposed to a system that allows it to grow unchecked in power over the private sector. So, in a not unrelated story, we have major new information confirming the racketeering operation that I think has been run by the Biden family for many, many years. Representative Comer, who runs the Oversight Committee for the Republicans in the House, has been able to extract information, despite the stonewalling of the Biden administration, about funding and transfers of money from a Chinese communist company to essentially the back pockets of the Biden family. There was at least $3 million that was funneled through a Biden family business associate to members of the Biden family. Pursuant to a subpoena, and this is a report that was issued, or a memo that was issued by the Committee on Oversight and Accountability on March 16th, 2023. And pursuant to a subpoena, the committee recently obtained financial records related to Mr. John Robertson Walker, a Biden family associate, and his company, Robertson Walker LLC. Prior to issuing the subpoena, the committee received information that Mr. Walker used his company to transfer money to Biden family members. The bank records prove that information correct. Mr. Walker established Robertson Walker LLC, a limited liability company, in Delaware in 2008. From 2015 to 2017, Biden family members and their companies received over $1.3 million in payments from related accounts from this Walker operation. The Biden family members who received money from this account included Haley Biden, who received two separate payments totaling $35,000 in 2017. Now, who is Haley Biden? She's the widow of Beau Biden, and subsequent to that, she became, according to reports, the girlfriend of Hunter Biden. She was involved, as you may recall, in that gun scandal with Hunter, where she took the gun from Hunter and threw it in a garbage can. And the Secret Service and FBI, as Judicial Watch has uncovered, evidently came and rescued Biden by going and vacuuming documents from the gun store that Biden had bought the gun from. So another family member who received the money, let's start from that, after the Haley discussion. Also receiving money was his brother James Biden, Hunter Biden, and a bank account identified as an unknown Biden. And according to the report, the committee is continuing to investigate the identity of this account holder. So this is the timeline. And I think it's important to go over this because the rest of the media is going to ignore this, and I want it to be on the record. Why? Because this information, which in my view provides further reason to launch an impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden. On March 1st, 2017, less than 2 months after former Vice President Biden left public office, State Energy HK Limited, a Chinese communist company, wired $3 million to Robertson Walker LLC. At the time of the wire, Walker's business account had a balance of approximately $159,000. So this was a big wire transfer. The next day, the LLC wired $1.065 million to European Energy and Infrastructure Group in Abu Dhabi, a company associated with James Gilliar. Gilliar was a business partner of Hunter Biden and was involved in foreign transactions with the Biden family. After the Robertson Walker account received $3 million from that state energy company, Biden family members and their companies received incremental payments over a period of approximately 3 months. The recipients of the money included, as I noted, Haley Biden, companies associated with Hunter Biden and James Biden, and an unknown bank account identified as Biden. The wires and online banking transfers are listed below, and maybe we can put the chart up. But you can see how these amounts were kept small enough, seemingly, to attract little notice. Really, all the hallmarks of a money laundering operation, don't you think? And you can see it in the chart below, totaling $1.065 million. Again, after the Chinese company wired the $3 million, the Biden family received approximately, as I said, over $1 million over a 3-month period. Notably, James Gilliar's affiliated company received almost the exact same amount on March 2nd, 2017. From the bank records, it appears that the Biden family received approximately 1/3 of the money obtained from the China wire. So you had $1 million essentially go to the Biden family, $1 million go to a company that was close to Hunter. And I don't know what's happened to the other $1 million. But this isn't the first time something like this has happened. On November 5th, 2015, while Joe Biden was Vice President of the United States, Robinson Walker received a wire from a company that they don't really know who the company was, that had an overseas bank account in the amount of $179,836. He transferred the next day $59,000 to one of his personal checking accounts. 3 days later, Walker used his personal checking account to send a wire to a bank account for, quote, Robert Biden in the amount of $59,000. Similar to the March 2017 transaction with the Chinese company, that company in Abu Dhabi that I told you about, EEIG, run by Gillier, also received $59,000. So isn't that interesting? So this guy connected to Biden. There are two instances of him getting money from one, a Chinese entity, Chinese communist entity, for $3 million. He seemingly keeps a third. A third goes to Hunter's business partner, and a third goes to the Biden family. It happened again during the Obama-Biden administration. A foreign account, we don't know who, sends big money to Walker. A third goes to Hunter Biden, and a third goes again to this company that was associated with Hunter Biden. And this is what the committee wants to know. The committee is concerned about the information revealed in these bank records, including why the Chinese energy company waited less than 2 months after Vice President Biden left office to send the $3 million wire, why the Robinson Walker account received the China company's payment instead of the Biden family members' companies directly, why the payments to the Biden family members were structured in incremental payments to different bank accounts, what services the Biden family members provided the China company, and when those purported services were provided, why Haley Biden publicly reported to work as a school counselor, received money from Robinson Walker, and who the account holder is for the bank account entitled Biden. And so we're going to see what happens there. But to me, and I appreciate that Comer is doing this investigation, but this investigation ought to be part of an impeachment inquiry. It is clear as day that Hunter Biden and Joe Biden are joined at the hip on these corruption issues. Joe Biden has lied about Hunter Biden's businesses. There's evidence showing that Hunter Biden was providing cash to Joe Biden. At least in one of these entities, there was this effort, one of these business deals, there was this effort to hide the involvement of Joe Biden, all of which is significant smoke of a RICO operation fire that was going on within the Biden family. And I recall talking to Rudy Giuliani, who, as a U.S. attorney, essentially helped create RICO prosecutions or used them in significant ways. So he's a national expert on this. And he made it clear in this interview I had with him, and based on what I also know about RICO, this is an open and shut RICO case against the Biden family. And this material is significant evidence of money laundering by the Biden family in league with the Communist Chinese government. Again, the Communist Chinese government laundered money to the Biden family. How else can you analyze this evidence? And what's going to be done about it? Well, obviously the Biden Justice Department, it's not really the Biden Justice Department, because the Justice Department and the FBI have known about this for years. They had Hunter Biden's laptop since 2019. It doesn't take a rocket science to look at the bank records to figure out what was going on here, and yet they've done nothing. So you can't expect much from the Justice Department and the FBI, which have been protecting Biden from the consequences of his obviously illegal corruption for countless years. So what should be done? I think an impeachment inquiry. Now, is there something impeachable here? I tend to think so. But in the least, they should be asking questions whether there's something impeachable here. And so I think the inquiry should be comprehensive and include this activity. And there's so much more that needs to be investigated in terms of impeachment. But that's my thinking on it. And if you share these views, or maybe even if you don't, I suggest you call your members of Congress to let them know what you think about Biden corruption and what they should be doing. Now, there's a lot more. They're going to be much more aggressive this year than they have been previously in terms of investigating this corruption and the abuses of power by the left to target citizens. The Weaponization Committee run by Jim Jordan, which is a separate committee from the Oversight Committee. I talked to some folks or found out this week they've got essentially 50 people working on that committee, which is good. So there's a lot of work to be done. But my view is there's got to be accountability, right? And either defunding of the agencies that do things wrong, impeachment of those who do things wrong and removal from office, criminal referrals, firing of government officials who are involved in misconduct. That needs to be done. And we can investigate till the cows come home. Judicial Watch investigates. But Congress has really quite extraordinary powers to get some accountability that Judicial Watch doesn't have. And so in the meantime, we'll work with Congress. We'll give them the records that we have. It's all public. It's not like we're hiding it from anyone. It's on the internet, but sometimes people need to be told where the documents are so they know what we have. And certainly to the degree that Congress can't get documents, you can be sure, as has been the case in the past, that Judicial Watch will be able to get the documents sometimes that Congress can't get. But we've got this accountability crisis here in Washington, D.C. We have a corruption crisis in Washington, D.C. The President of the United States, Joe Biden, has been compromised by his family's corruption vis-a-vis China, Ukraine, and Russia, and Lord knows where else. And that's got to be investigated and ferreted out, and there's got to be accountability, and we have to work towards it. And Judicial Watch will. And when Congress does the right thing, as they're doing here, we will applaud them. Where they're going slow, we'll push them. And where they want to work, we'll work with them. And I encourage you to share your views, as I said, with Congress, 202-225-3121. Now, part of the corruption by the Biden administration, as we talked about the weaponization of federal agencies to target opponents of Biden, is the abuse, and I talked about this a little bit last week, of Elon Musk, who is being targeted by multiple Biden agencies, in my view, for retaliation over his efforts to bring free speech to Twitter. Now, the left believes that the social media platforms are theirs to run, and that if you engage in speech they don't like, you should be deleted, censored, deplatformed, canceled, you name it. For instance, the left is furious with Biden working with journalists to expose the so-called Twitter files, which are documents by Twitter that show collusion by Twitter and other big tech companies with government agencies to censor American citizens by the millions. They not only expose collusion with Twitter, but like Facebook and Google and YouTube, which have a much broader reach in terms of impact on American citizens than even Twitter does. And the left is furious at that. They had journalists who have been looking into that Twitter files, and they were testifying to Jordan's committee last week on this weaponization, and the left and their media allies were attacking the journalists for doing journalism on this government corruption and censorship. But as soon as Elon Musk, who is to be commended for disclosing this corruption by his corporation, certainly the prior leadership, it's extraordinary. It's never been done before. The left started attacking him. And one of the first things Joe Biden said after the November elections, he came out to the podium and directed that he thought that Musk needs to be the subject of a national security review. So he's been personally targeted by Joe Biden. And Jim Jordan's committee exposed how the Federal Trade Commission, we know generally that the Federal Trade Commission has been harassing Musk, but Jordan got details of the harassment, which is quite extraordinary, showing that they were asking for records about his communications with journalists. They wanted essentially all records about Musk himself, anything he wrote or caused to be sent out, complete and vicious harassment over supposedly a consent decree regarding the privacy of Twitter users. So they were just using that consent decree as leverage to harass Twitter on everything because Musk was running it and they don't like what Musk was doing. Now, Judicial Watch had seen that the FTC was up to no good, and we had filed a Freedom of Information Act request back in November for records and communications maintained by Lina Khan, chairperson, U.S. Federal Trade Commission, including memoranda, reports, briefings, handwritten notes, email communications, email chains, and email attachments, and other forms or records or communications exchanged regarding or referring to Mr. Elon Musk, CEO, Twitter, or the company Twitter with the below-named individuals. And then we list the other commissioners. So we wanted to know the political involvement in this FTC operation. Now, the Federal Trade Commission under this Lina Khan is notoriously corruptly run. She's essentially turned it into a one-woman show, running the staff as if they're her own personal political operatives. So when they target Twitter, it's at the behest of this Biden appointee. Now, of course, the FTC, which is so concerned about enforcing the rule of law against Elon Musk and Twitter, refuses to follow the rule of law when it comes to FOIA and Judicial Watch. So we were forced to sue the other day for these records under the Freedom of Information Act. So this is the wonderful thing about that law. That means the FTC will now have to go to court or go before the federal court here in D.C. and answer for its refusal to turn over one record to Judicial Watch about this unprecedented targeting of Elon Musk and Twitter. And as we said earlier, as I described earlier, the Federal Trade Commission document demands to Twitter obtained by the House Judiciary Committee show onerous requests for all documents about Elon Musk and documents concerning Twitter's work with journalists to disclose to the public the details about the government's and Twitter's censorship of American citizens. A House report entitled "The Weaponization of the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, an agency's overreach to harass Elon Musk's Twitter," details Twitter allowed journalists, as part of their reporting on government censorship by proxy, to review internal communications and correspondence between Twitter employees and federal agencies, including the FBI. The FTC's first demand in its letter sent after the initial installment of the Twitter files did not concern what private user information may have been at risk. Instead, the FTC demanded that Twitter identify all journalists and other members of the media to whom Twitter had granted access to since Musk bought the company. The FTC even named some of the specific journalists with whom Twitter has engaged on the Twitter files. The FTC also demanded to know any other members of the media to whom you have granted any type of access to the company's internal communications for any reason whatsoever. So this is obviously overreach and abuse and harassment. On November 10th, the FTC sent 2 demand letters asking for voluminous information about Twitter's personnel actions, terminations or resignations, and about the Twitter Blue service. Now, what is Twitter Blue? Essentially, you can, under Musk, he instituted this new program that you can pay Musk, I think, or Twitter $8 a month and you get the blue check mark. It used to be in order to get the blue check mark, you had to show that you were important enough to get it. Now, if you pay $8 a month, you can get it. For whatever reason, the left didn't like that, mainly because I think left media journalists who had blue check marks thought the value of the check mark became diminished by Musk making it available to regular Americans. Some of the FTC's demands about Twitter Blue, such as when the service was first conceived, appear to serve little purpose other than to pile on the already burdensome requests. One such demand came just 2 days after Twitter reactivated President Trump's account. In this letter, the FTC demanded nearly 20 additional categories of information about Twitter Blue. Now, the FTC under Biden is obviously targeting Twitter, abusing power to retaliate against Musk for supporting free speech on Twitter. And now, as this Judicial Watch federal FOIA lawsuit shows, the FTC is trying to cover up this attempt to silence and punish Elon Musk. So I'm convinced that Musk's work on Twitter needs to be protected because if he fails and he's pushed back and from protecting free speech on Twitter, we'll be significantly hurt as a nation in terms of the ability to communicate freely online about issues of public import. For instance, Twitter, there was another set of Twitter files that just came out as I'm a little bit before I'm making this report to you, detailing how there was this private project that was similar to another private project that was run by these entities in Stanford, University of Washington, Graphica and such, all funded by the government to target election integrity. So there was this other project called the Virality Project. Virality, I guess that's a word. Again, with these left-wing groups that were working with the CDC to target information about COVID for censorship. And they were telling Twitter and the other big tech companies that true information about vaccine adverse events, true information about vaccine passports, and true information generally that cause vaccine hesitancy should be treated as disinformation and censored and taken down. So if it got in the way of their particular agenda related to COVID and vaccines, whether it was true or not, they wanted it censored. Of course, we've known that's been the case. I know I've been personally censored by Twitter using that type of analysis. But how many others have been? All at the behest of the government through this government front, this so-called private entity that receives government funding and partners with the government to target American citizens and to decimate their free speech rights and First Amendment protections. And so that's why they hate Elon Musk, because he's exposing this corruption that blow out of the water the idea that the CDC, the Department of Homeland Security, the Biden White House can be trusted to defer and protect and respect our First Amendment rights. So this is why this lawsuit that Judicial Watch filed against the FTC is so important, because the FTC is abusing its authority to harass Twitter, to harass Twitter and Elon Musk for doing the right thing. So in many ways, Elon Musk is a kind of a corporate whistleblower, and he doesn't need to be doing this. He has more money than Midas, and yet he's putting himself out there to do this, to expose this corruption. He could buy Twitter and just keep it all quiet, do what he wants business-wise, and no one would be the wiser. But because he sees himself as a good citizen and he believes that freedom of information is essential to the future of humanity, he's been pushing this information out quite happily. And for that, he's being targeted by the petty tyrants at the Biden Federal Trade Commission, the Biden White House, and other agencies. And we're going to expose this corruption, and in doing so, we hope stop it. One of the wonderful things about Judicial Watch is there's, at least when you're looking at the open records laws, there's no topic that isn't covered by the open records laws. If there's an issue that's of public concern and the government's involved, we can use FOIA to educate the public about what the government's up to with respect to the topic. And it goes from everywhere from COVID to abortion to obviously corruption, Biden corruption, Hillary's emails, Benghazi, the IRS, you name it, to foreign policy. And in a specific case, the involvement of foreign governments, who I don't think wish us all that much in the way of success, in our nation's public life. Specifically, Judicial Watch has been working with a client in Texas to get information about a foreign government's funding of Texas A&M. Specifically, Qatar. I call it Qatar. I'm told to pronounce it Gutter. It's Qatar. But I'm going to call it Qatar because that's the way I pronounce it. And Texas A&M has this program in Education City in Qatar. And of course, obviously, it was funded by this Qatar Front, the Qatar Foundation. And the problem with Qatar is it's not a normal government in the sense that it's been tied to terrorism. It's voraciously anti-Israel. And certainly there's a public interest, don't you think, in figuring out how much money they're giving to a U.S. university, especially an important one like Texas A&M. Now, Texas A&M didn't really have much in the way of objection of giving us documents about this funding scheme or what they were doing with Qatar, but the Qatar Foundation sued. So we had been working with the Zakar Legal Institute, which is a U.S.-based advocacy group dedicated to combating the spread of anti-Semitism. Zakar made requests under the Texas Public Information Act for information about the funding of war donations made to Texas A&M by the government of Qatar and the agencies and subdivisions of the government. Qatar controversially has aligned itself with Islamic terrorists and extremists, which had placed it at odds with the United States, Israel, and other U.S. allies in the Middle East. So our client began asking for this information back in 2018, so that's not nearly 5 years ago. They wanted to know how Texas A&M was able to establish a degree-conferring campus in Qatar without the Texas legislature's permission or involvement. Texas A&M is a public university. In 2018, Qatar filed a lawsuit to prevent disclosure of its funding information. Now, Judicial Watch, on behalf of the Zakar Legal Institute, countered with the argument that neither the Qatari government nor any of its agencies are protected exceptions under Texas law, and that federal law expressly makes the requested information public. Texas A&M claimed making the records public would reveal confidential donor information. Judicial Watch countered this argument by pointing out the law only protects private donors, not donations from a foreign government body, specifically the Qatar Foundation. The Qatar Foundation was created by the Emir of Qatar, is chaired by his consort, and is sponsored and supported by the government of Qatar, a monarchy. At no point did the Qatar Foundation demonstrate that it is not an agency or subdivision of the government of Qatar. After reviewing the briefing, the arguments, and the evidence, including the documents submitted by the Qatar Foundation, Judge Amy Clark Meekum, who is a judge in Travis County, a Texas state judge, ruled in favor of Judicial Watch and the Zakar Legal Institute and ordered that the documents be made public. So the funding materials are about to be made public. I'm not quite sure if how quickly that's going to happen, because there may be an opportunity for the Qatar Foundation to appeal. But this is a great victory for the rule of law and transparency and national security, dare I say it. The court was right to reject the arguments of Qatar that sought to hide information about this foreign government's funding of Texas A&M. This case has been a multi-year court battle against a foreign government entity tied to Islamist terrorism. So this latest victory is sweet. How sweet it is. And I can tell you, this case has been up and down the Texas courts. We have been litigating against the Qatar Foundation, which has unlimited money, practically speaking. So they've had, top-notch firms working for them. And it's just, the Judicial Watch team with our client. Michael Bekesha is the lawyer who's been handling this case, and we've had some great lawyers in Texas working with us as well. I do want to give them some credit. We were assisted by this case specifically by Jennifer Riggs of Riggs & Ray PC in Austin, Texas. So the Zakar Legal Institute had a great comment. They said they're grateful for the incredible support and skill of the entire Judicial Watch team. Its president, Mark Greendorfer, said, "We now look forward to receiving the records that Qatar has spent the last 4+ years blocking from public review. Our Qatari agents have a history of refusing to comply with lawful orders in the United States, such as Al Jazeera's continuing refusal to comply with the Department of Justice 2020 order to register under the Foreign Agents Registration Act." I didn't know that. I guess I did know that, but it's good to recall that Al Jazeera is an operator or an operation of Qatar, and they're essentially a foreign agent, and they're refusing to register as such. Well, we won't stop our inquiries into what Qatar is doing in the United States. We hope that Qatar will end its interference with American institutions now that Judicial Watch has once again compelled transparency in government. So, if Qatar is doing things on the up and up, why not just release the documents? I mean, it's not unusual for governments to subsidize, this type of activity, like education establishment. Look, I understand why Qatar wants U.S. universities to have campuses in Qatar. But for the reasons I suggested, namely their allegiance to Islamicism, their vicious anti-Israeli policies, U.S. Universities would be hesitant to do so. So they obviously sweeten the pot, and we want to know how this pot was sweetened. And we're having to battle essentially a foreign government in our own courts in Texas to get access to what's going on here. But this is a great victory. This is David versus Goliath. Our client and Judicial Watch, we're David, and Qatar is Goliath. And we beat them in Texas State Court, and we're looking forward, hopefully, to getting these documents soon. And of course, we're only able to do it with your support. I encourage you to support Judicial Watch by going to our website at judicialwatch.org, judicialwatch.org, and you can not only donate to Judicial Watch, but share this work and share the documents we're able to uncover with your friends and colleagues and other folks online and elsewhere, because not only is it important that you support our work financially, but you get the word out, because I tell you what, everything we do virtually is exposing secrets the government doesn't want citizens to know about. So anything you can do to combat that corruption, the better our great nation will be. With that, I thank you, and I'll see you here next time on the Judicial Watch Weekly Update. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.